Great, thank you, Joe, and good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm going to speak to you about an exciting project which is currently ongoing in EUFIC to investigate the role played by national newspapers across Europe in the communication of food risks and food benefits. And in my presentation today, I would focus not only on the key findings from this research, but I will also provide insights into the tone of the reporting and, where appropriate, into the scientific basis for this reporting. So before going any further, I would first like to introduce you to EUFIC, the European Food Information Council. We are a non-profit organisation based in Brussels, and our mission is to communicate science-based information on food safety and quality and nutrition and health to professionals, educators and journalists in a way that promotes consumer understanding. And our organisation, we receive funding from the agri-food chain and also from the European Commission on a project basis. All of our information is published online on eufic.org, and our information is published in up to 11 different languages, and we're currently in the process of adding a 12th language to our repertoire. Our website, we have a very large outreach. We have over 7.2 million visitor sessions per year, and we currently have over 45,000 online subscribers. So for any of you that aren't currently a subscriber, I'd like to invite you today to sign up to receive free regular updates on food safety and quality and nutrition and health. And of course, you can also find us on social media, on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. So moving back to the task in hand today, my presentation covers three main areas. Firstly, I'll describe the aims and background of the project. Secondly, the research methodology. And then finally, I'll focus on our key findings. So firstly, our aims. Well, we had three overall aims at the outset of this project. Firstly, to investigate the balance of food benefits and risk reporting in European newspapers. Secondly, to investigate the tone of the reporting. So is the tone across Europe, is it predominantly positive, negative or neutral? And then finally, to investigate, as appropriate, if the reporting has a good scientific basis. So before moving any further, I think it's useful just to have a look at the modern communication landscape. And I think it's indisputable to say that we now live in an era of social media communications, where online and social media are becoming very important platforms for the delivery and generation of all types of news, including news about food. So considering that we live in this era of social media communications, why are we so concerned about printed newspapers? Well, firstly, there are three main reasons. Firstly, traditional newspapers still play an important role in reaching the wider public. We know that approximately 25% of all Europeans are not internet users, therefore they receive their information from more traditional means. Secondly, we know that newspapers are commonly cited in social media communications as a source of food risk and benefit information. So therefore the information which is reported in these traditional newspapers really has the potential to reach a large number of people, whether it's directly or indirectly. And finally, a recently published study found that, this study was published in the UK, found that misreporting of dietary advice is widespread and it may contribute to public misconceptions about food and health. And it was really this final study which prompted us to undertake a more European-wide study and to investigate the effect across all of Europe. So I'll move on now to describe the methodology we used for this project. For this project, we looked at newspaper reporting across Europe. We looked across 8 different countries so that we had a good widespread distribution. So we looked at reporting in Sweden, England, Belgium, Germany, Poland, France, Italy and Spain. And in each country, we looked at the top 3 selling newspapers. And these top 3 selling newspapers were based on circulation and readership numbers. And within these 8 countries, we looked at both broadsheets, which of course are the more serious-minded newspapers, but also tabloids, which I guess are the more light-hearted papers, more commonly reporting on celebrity news and gossip rather than political stories. The newspapers were sampled daily for a period of 4 weeks. We sampled the newspapers for 2 weeks in September 2011, and then we repeated again in March 2012. So overall, we sampled almost 700 newspapers across 8 countries and across 8 different languages. So what did we do with these newspapers? Well, firstly, the newspapers were read by a native speaker. Relevant articles within the newspapers were selected, and then relevant statements or claims within these articles were selected. So what type of statements and claims did we look for? Well, we looked for 7 different types. Firstly, we looked for health claims, and a health claim is something which will report about the positive effect of a food, a drink or their constituents on health, and these of course include disease risk reduction claims. We also looked at nutrition claims. A nutrition claim is something which reports about the energy or nutrient content of a food, a drink or their constituents, and these type of claims state or imply a link or association with health. And the example here is milk is a good source of magnesium. We also looked at risk safety statements, and we defined a risk safety statement as one which has a negative effect about the food or drink or their constituents on health, so it's very, very negative. We also looked at reporting on specific diets, and we looked in particular at positive or negative effects of a specific diet on health. So we looked at diets, some of the commonly reported diets were, for example, the Mediterranean diet, the Nordic diet, the Atkins diet, and so on. In terms of eating behaviours, our statements and claims on eating behaviours related to either the positive or negative effect of an eating behaviour on health. Guidelines or recommendations, as the name implies, these are something which are very much action-based, such as eat this or limit your consumption of this. And these dietary guidelines or recommendations could have been made by authoritative sources, or they could have been made by the journalists themselves. And then finally, we looked at reporting on nutritional content. So to be able to extract and analyse the information within and across all of these newspapers, we developed a coding protocol. And the coding protocol consisted of a series of questions with standardised categorical responses. And within this coding protocol, we captured information on the newspaper, on the article, and on the statement or claim reported. And just regarding the information we captured on the statement or claim, we captured information on, firstly, the type of statement or claim, the tone, what food category was mentioned, the causative agent, the health implication, and we also looked at, did the journalist quote a source for the information. So we move on now to look at our key findings. So for this project, we looked at over 25 different newspaper titles. We analysed a total of 667 newspapers. Of these, 230 reported relevant information, so that was a reporting of 34.5%. Within these 230 newspapers, there were 400 relevant articles, and within these 400 relevant articles, we had a total of 1,675 statements or claims, and we analysed each of these as part of this project. So if we look at the country of reporting, we can see that most of the reporting occurred in the UK, with Belgium and Italy coming in second and third position, with the lowest amount of reporting actually occurring in Germany. And with regard to the UK reporting, we actually saw there were significant differences in the type of paper. So, for example, the Daily Mail in the UK reported significantly more than the other newspapers analysed. If we look now at the type of information reported across Europe, we can see that most of the reporting related to health claims, over 30.4% in this category, with nutrition content and nutrition claims taking up the second and third position. But I think what's really interesting from these data are that the risk safety statements accounted for only 13% of the overall reporting. And we certainly found this quite surprising, because at the outset of this project, our perception was that there was much more reporting on food risks and food safety issues than on any other issues. And you can also see from this slide that the amount of reporting on specific diets or eating behaviours was really minimal. So looking a little bit closer then at the 5 top categories of statements and claims, we looked at how are these reported across all of the different countries. And we can see here that all of the countries, with the exception of France, reported on all 5 categories. So they're reported on health claims, nutrition content, nutrition claims, risk safety statements, and dietary guidelines or recommendations. And in all of these countries, the top category that was reported was either health claims or nutrition content. And the only exception really being was France. And in France, most of the reporting was related to risk safety statements. And we also looked at the tone of the reporting, because the tone can certainly have a significant impact on consumers' perceptions of the issue. And there's certainly a widespread perception out there that, particularly during times of food crisis, that there is certainly a tendency to use more negative terms and sensationalise the risk in the media. So in terms of our research, we looked at the tone. We categorised all of the statements and claims as positive, negative or neutral. A positive claim being one that has a positive effect on one's health, negative effect on health, and then, of course, neutral. So we can see from this slide that most of the health claims, which is the first bar, and most of the nutrition claims were positive. Most of the risk safety statements were negative, and most of the nutritional content statements were neutral. And this is exactly what we would have expected. And it really was just confirmed to us that our coding protocol was correct. So we then looked at all of the statements and claims which were reported within an individual article and assigned an overall tone to that article. And from this we saw that over 46% of the articles were positive, with the remainder being negative, neutral or mixed. And then looking at the tone of articles by country, we can see that for most countries the tone is positive, with the exception of France, where most of the tone is negative. But again, as we've already mentioned, in France there's a higher tendency to look at risk safety statements, and these by their nature are negative in tone. We also looked at what were the foods reported across Europe. So was there a tendency to look at more than one food more than others? And in total, the specific food was mentioned in 78% of the statements or claims. And when we looked at all of these foods, we captured information on 21 different food types. And we found that, I suppose, no individual food really stood out. They were all reported as levels lower than 10% of the overall total. However, if we put the fruit and vegetable category together, we can see that this could be quite significant. Looking at the tone of reporting in relation to food type, again we can see that most foods were positive. The reporting about most foods were positive. I think the two exceptions here really are alcohol and water. And in both of these cases, the reporting was predominantly neutral. However, of course, these are the findings across all of Europe, and there were differences within individual countries. So, for example, within the UK, the reporting on alcohol was predominantly positive. And this, I suppose, is quite surprising, considering the UK government's approach to try and reduce binge drinking and so on, but yet the reporting is positive. One other point which is quite relevant here is that you can see from many of the foods there are both positive and negative reporting. So that's the blue and the red bars. And I just want to expand on this in a little bit more detail in the next two slides. And I've just picked out, firstly, if we look at the reporting, I've just picked out apples as a case study. We can see here that in relation to the benefit reporting on apples, there was a typical example of a claim was that apples are the true superfoods. They significantly lower the eater's chances of stroke, so that's good. It entices us all to eat apples. However, on the negative side, the risks associated with apples, Firstly, the association between birch pollen allergy and apple allergy was reported. But the other risks related to the persistence of chemicals on the skin of apples despite basic kitchen practices such as washing. If we look a little bit more closely at the benefit and risk reporting about alcohol, on the benefit side, of course, it reports that drinking wine it can reduce the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. On the benefit side, there's a lot of benefit reporting about alcohol. For example, drinking so much improves our overall health and so on. And while this risk and benefit reporting about specific foodstuffs, it's all, it can all be genuine and it can all be quite true. However, we have to always bear in mind the perception of the consumers that are reading this information. And very often the information may not be framed correctly. And if it's not framed correctly, it can really create conflict in the mind of the reader, so that they can quite often dismiss the information and dismiss the source that it's coming from. So it's very important that this risk-benefit information is framed correctly by the media. If we look at the sources quoted across Europe, we can see that overall a source was quoted in 55% of the statements or claims. And of those, the country with the highest level of using a source was Germany, and with Poland being the lowest. And if we look a bit more detail about what sources were reported, we can see that over 38% quoted scientific or medical experts, 13% researchers, 8% the food industry, and so on. The remaining slides in this presentation, I'm going to focus in particular on two different categories of statements or claims. So firstly, I'm going to focus on health claims, and then secondly on the risk safety statements. Looking first at some quotes from the newspapers on health claims, we have things like calcium provides good bone strength, vitamin C helps the absorption of iron, selenium may help fight cancer, and so on. So these are typical of what we found across Europe. So overall, we had 510 health claims, and we looked at what food categories were most commonly mentioned within these claims. And in this slide, I've listed the top 5 food categories, which were food supplements, fruits, vegetables, seafood, and drinks, which were tea or coffee, and herbal drinks. We also looked at what is the responsible agent for these health claims. And we found the responsible agent was mentioned in 74.7% of statements. And the top responsible agent was phytochemicals, followed by fats, vitamins, minerals, and carbohydrates. And then looking at the health impact that was reported, over 17% discussed the health impact in relation to cardiovascular health, followed by gastrointestinal health, cancer, mental health, and so on. Now, of those 510 health claims, we really wanted to look and see, is there a scientific basis for this reporting? Is there a strong basis? So firstly, within Europe, all health claims which are used on the labelling and marketing of a specific food must be authorised under European legislation, which is Regulation 1924 of 2006. And in the context of this authorisation process, the European Food Safety Authority, they're responsible for verifying the scientific substantiation of these health claims. And as part of this procedure, they maintain a register of questions database. And within this database, they list all of the questions they have been asked, or all of the health claims they've been asked to investigate. And they say whether, yes, we're currently in the process of investigating this, or they say we're finished investigating this, and so on. So although not applicable to the newspaper reporting, we use this EFSA register database really as a reference point to look at the scientific basis for the claims reported in the newspapers. So what did we find? Well, of the 510 claims reported in the newspapers, we found that of these, that EFSA have passed an opinion on 300 of these, so they passed an opinion on almost 60% of these. So then we delved a little bit further to see what was the outcome of this opinion. And we found that for over 50% of these health claims, EFSA have not substantiated the claim. In relation to over 37%, EFSA have substantiated the claim. And then we had this additional category, which was almost 11%. And these are broader claims containing both substantiated and non-substantiated elements. So I think these results are quite interesting. If we look a little bit closer at the risk safety statements reported in across Europe, these are examples of some of the articles that were reported. One relating, as I mentioned already, to pesticides persisting on your fruits and vegetables, another about aluminium being a silent killer, and another one again on pesticides. In total, we had 215 risk safety statements, and the food category was mentioned in almost 70% of these. So the top 5 categories are listed in this slide, so dairy and eggs, meat, soft drinks, vegetables and grains. We also looked a little bit closer at the causative agents for these risk safety statements. This was mentioned in over 74% of the statements or claims. We found that, quite interestingly, that over 50% of these risk safety statements, the risk was associated with the nutritional content of the food, while only 22% were linked to a specific contaminant in the food. So if we look a little bit closer, I'm going to break this up a little bit more in the next slide. And if we look at the nutritional content, we can see that most of the nutritional content is related to the mineral, carbohydrates or fat content of the food. In relation to contaminants, most of the reporting was about metals or bacterial contaminants. And we can see that things like pesticides, fungicides and acrylamide only got a very low level of reporting in the European newspapers. And then looking closer at the health impact that was reported in these risk safety statements, over 15% related to cardiovascular health, 11% to cancer, over 9% to allergies and so on. So then just to summarise, firstly, we saw significant differences in the volume and the type of reporting between countries. Secondly, we noted that the tone of reporting was predominantly positive. However, the tone is certainly linked to the type of information reported. So if this study was carried out at another time, for example, if there was a specific risk being reported in the news, the tone could have been different. We found that no one food dominated the reporting. However, we also found that many risks and benefits were reported for many of the foods. We found that traditional media placed a strong emphasis on the source of the information. And in relation to the health claims, we found that over 37% of health claims have been substantiated by EFSA. So I suppose the overall conclusion is there's certainly widespread perception across Europe that newspapers report more frequently on food risks than on food benefits, and that this reporting is biased by the overuse of negative tone. However, our data show that this perception does not hold true for the newspapers over the periods that we examined. And finally, just to acknowledge my colleagues in EUFIC who were a fantastic help in doing all of this work, and also all of the other graduates that we had working on the different languages for this project. So thank you.